One of the things that sometimes not realized is that we do not have any robust statistical data on job creation in India after the year 2011-12. So much of the discussion happens on the basis of data that are dated. 2011-12 was the last year when the National Sample Survey had large-scale surveys on the state of employment generation. That does not prevent people from discussing. We will have a new round of the NSS, the National Sample Survey, which will soon be announced, and I am sure that that particular survey will show that there has been substantial employment and substantial job creation. I think the first point one needs to realize that India is still an informal and unorganized country. And therefore the kind of surveys that are based on enterprises, the enterprise surveys, provide a very imperfect understanding of what is happening to employment in India. In India, a large part of employment is still self-employment. It is still in the unorganized sector. It is still in the informal sector. Therefore, the enterprise surveys do not tell us anything significant. The only sensible way we can get data on jobs and employment is through household surveys, which is what the NSS is. The first thing to realize is what is the role of the government. The Modi government, which is part of the union government. A large part of what happens to jobs, employment, the business environment is in the province of the states. Having said that, the most important thing that the government can do, the most important thing that the union government can do is to facilitate an enabling environment for enterprises to function, for entrepreneurship to flourish, and this does not only mean the corporate business sector. And this is precisely what the Modi government has been doing by pushing self-employment, by pushing entrepreneurship. This is what the Prime Minister means when he talks about Stand Up India, Start Up India. This is exactly the intention when one talks about the possible job creation, which is difficult to quantify on the basis of the Mudra loans. So this is the first thing that needs to be done. The second thing that needs to be done is to create physical infrastructure, health and education. These are necessary for growth to happen, for jobs to happen. And again, what is inadequately appreciated is what the Modi government has done in terms of enabling people, enabling growth, enabling employment generation through the provision of physical infrastructure like transport, through the provision of electricity, through the provision of gas connections, through the provision of other kinds of health and educational interventions. On top of that, there is a lack of correlation sometimes between education and skills, and one therefore needs to flag what has been done in the area of skill formation, not just in urban India but also in rural areas. A combination of all of these things enables that the economy does well, growth rates are higher, which means that there will be employment generation, which also means that people will be able to find jobs, and these jobs increasingly cannot be and should not be jobs that are only in the government sector, because the government per se can only provide a limited number of jobs. The bulk of jobs will have to be created outside the government. They will have to be created outside manufacturing. They will have to be created in the services sector. They will have to be created in the rural sector, which means off-farm employment opportunities, which means commercialization and diversification of agriculture, which means jobs in the rural sector that are no longer classic agriculture, but are involved with processing of agricultural produce such as refrigeration, processing, transportation and trade. I have already said that robust data on jobs and employment are still lacking. Nevertheless, people quote all kinds of surveys that are floating around which are not really large surveys. But there is a point I want to make about this. One of the noticeable features in these surveys is that there is an opting out of the job market on the part of the young. So the critical question here is, when we are talking about jobs, what particular part of the age spectrum are we talking about? If, for instance, people who are under 21 are dropping out of the job market, I would say that that's a good indicator. That's not a bad indicator, because this establishes that people are enrolling for higher education. Not just amongst men but also amongst women, there is clear evidence of the work participation rates amongst the young dropping. And I think that is entirely due or largely due to the fact that a large number of young people are now enrolling for higher education, and the higher education enrollment rates have distinctly gone up. So I would regard that as a positive. Also, while we are talking about jobs, I don't think the real issue is the number of jobs. The real issue is the quality of the jobs. The real issue is the wage rates. I think it's also important to realize that sometimes when people are complaining that enough jobs are not being created, what they really have in mind, mentally at least and psychologically, is that they have a certain expectation about the wages that the market will fetch, and the market is not delivering those wages or salaries, which is the point that I made earlier about the lack of correlation between education and skills, because a lot of people have spent money, not just public money, also private money on education, and therefore they are no longer content with the kind of salaries that the job market is going to deliver. While on the job market, one must also remember there are issues of intermediation between matching the supply and demand of jobs. And again, I would quickly want to flag the various initiatives that the Modi government has done in terms of bridging that gap, including setting up portals so that the job demanders can directly get in touch with the job seekers.